as we step into this particular session where we're going to talk about the larger story that your masculine journey, your story is going through, or even in a probably a more specific way, what does warfare have to say? What does warfare have to do with masculinity? And that's what we're going to talk about in this session of the Exploring More podcast.
With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoe's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful ends for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more.
Welcome, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast. Michael Thompson hanging out with S.J. Jennings. We are exploring the kingdom, particularly in the subject of masculinity, which we do talk about from time to time.
Quite a bit. Yes.
Quite a bit. It's what we do. It's
Yeah.
what we get to do. It's where we are in our own stories and journey, but also where God's come for us as masculine image bearers, and where we want to give hope and help, encouragement,
100%.
Equipment to other men. And so, hopefully this series on is biblical masculinity really, is it really helping? Is it really helpful? And trying to kind of bring into the light some of the things that I've experienced and you have in our masculine journeys from that title, that idea that wasn't or hadn't been as helpful, and why. And so the answer to why has a lot to do with what we want to uncover, share, offer to this conversation about what does kingdom masculinity look like. And I thought this was funny, SJ, like the Jesus had some scriptures. I mean, the Old Testament, the Torah, I mean, there was the scriptures, biblical masculinity, nothing wrong with, David and Moses and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I mean, those are masculine characters in the scriptures for sure. And I think we can glean some things that are important for what it means to be a man. But you've said it now 2 or 3 times, so I'm beating you to it. But probably the most significant character in this conversation is Jesus. And the image that we bear of the Trinity, and Jesus saying, "If you've seen me, you've seen the Father." And missionally, one of the most significant things he did come to do among a handful of things was reveal what the Father's like.
Mm-hmm.
Reveal what a relationship, intimate relationship with him is like, father and son. And so we are sons.
And I would add, the relationship between us and him. So just watch The Chosen,
Right.
read about the disciples and how he interacts with them. I'm thinking about Peter in particular, and just how he interacts with him is such a great example of, men interacting with one another.
Yeah.
And how that's supposed to go, at least from one side.
And so to take that, to keep moving in the direction you're going, and how does he interact with me?
Right.
And what is he inviting me, and how is he inviting me to interact with him?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, so much of this goes to relationship and brotherhood and words that are in both these camps, biblical masculinity and kingdom masculinity. And
mm-hmm.
yet as if you don't resolve the image bearing piece that we talked about last session, you're gonna have a hard time in either camp of not just understanding. It's important to watch the video. It's important to read the article. It's important to study the scriptures. But until you go on the range and you hit that golf ball, or you shoot that gun. I mean, you can read about it.
Or you pray for those people.
You can read about it. You can read about it, and you should. You can watch videos about it. But until you go and experience this for yourself, it's going to be very difficult to overturn and overthrow your perceptions, or even your inabilities to experience that for yourself. And so I didn't even know the weightiness and the effect of my beliefs about the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit and myself that were in the way.
Yeah.
And some of those we talked about last session were cultivated and continued to be perpetuated through the biblical masculinity that I was experiencing in church. And some of that, SJ, was indirect. Like it wasn't, biblical masculinity may not have been the subject of the Sunday morning sermon, but I'm watching men and I'm observing men, including the pastor, and how they're rolling and what they're saying.
Sure.
And that's affecting my perception, my beliefs, my attitudes and perspective about me on my masculine journey and becoming a man. And I would say, before we take a quick break, in a significant way, it was not helpful. Not helpful. And I don't want to jump the gun, but there are subjects that we get to talk about in this series. Being told not to do certain things and to do other, and then to do other things is part of life. And there's a reality to that. For sure. Drive on this side of the road. Don't drive on that side of the road.
Right.
Don't
follow too closely.
Check your oil.
Check your mirrors.
And check your mirror. Yeah.
Wear your seatbelt.
And there's things that you learn because there is a way things work. And we're going to talk about that when we after this break. But I just want to say that, again, there are some variables and components to this that I didn't know how church and my upbringing actually was affecting my masculinity, my manhood, my ability to become a man, and what kind of man I would become until I really had the chance to look back and see, well, what were the things that contributed? And as far as scriptures and biblical, I was getting regular doses and regular messages and regular sermons on all of that. But translating it into my reality of what it means to be a man after God's own heart, man, it was far more confusing than helpful.
Yeah, no guidance there at all.
And so I want to, as we step into this particular session where we're going to talk about the larger story that your masculine journey, your story is going through, or even in a probably a more specific way, what does warfare have to say? What does warfare have to do with masculinity? And that's what we're going to talk about in this session of the Exploring More podcast. We'll be right back.
Men are seeing higher suicide rates in this country, and
I think a lot of young men are actually looking for the answer to that
toxic
question.
Masculinity.
How did masculinity end up here? Being known for causing harm, being violent, overpowering, and unsafe, and being relationally destructive or relationally absent. This is not who men were created to be. Men have been the target of a long and brutal assault by an enemy that knows what we might become and fears it. At Zoe, we believe that if men are a big part of the problem in culture today, men could be a big part of the solution. What if masculinity was safe and loving? What if masculinity was adventurous and encouraging? What if men were brave and empathetic, engaging and helpful? What if masculinity looked like Jesus, kind and strong? What if men were no longer dangerous, but dangerous for good?
Welcome back to the Exploring More podcast and maybe to the War Room, to a space committed, devoted these next several minutes to looking at, is biblical masculinity the answer? Well, I'm going to say it right now, it's not. If your biblical theology does not emphasize significantly what the scriptures emphasize significantly, and that is that we are in a world at war. We have an enemy, and the New Testament for sure has more to say consistently about the kingdom of darkness, about the prince of this dark world, about the father of lies, about the armor that you better have,
unholy trinity,
about the trials that you're going to face, about the roaring lion that has come to devour you. I mean, there's a reason why the friends of Jesus talk about this to the friends of Jesus in these first century churches. All these letters.
All right, I'm just going to throw this in there. There's a reason why it's in there. It's in the scriptures. There's a reason Jesus talks about it. Is there a reason why it's like one of the best kept secrets about Christianity today?
Is there such thing as a best kept secret?
Like
a best kept secret? That's
I just don't. You don't hear about it.
Not enough.
We never talked about it in our church.
Yeah.
And it's not because it's unbiblical.
Yeah.
I'm convinced of that. So why is it not talked about?
Right.
Is that a ploy of the enemy somehow?
I mean, that's a great point. That's a great point. Well, I think there's some false ideas. I'm not going to say false teaching. Maybe it's because it's not being talked about. There's implications that there's some that then gives me some false ideas that it doesn't exist. If we're not talking about it, then I get the false idea that it's not that big a deal.
Beautiful tactical move to convince you that you don't have an enemy.
And that's C.S. Lewis's position. Either we think too little of them, or we think way too much. Mm-hmm. But we've found over our 15 years of doing this together for the hearts of men, it's better to for them to be somewhat not only aware, awakened to it, and even overwhelmed by it, and swung to this place of, holy crap. What do you mean I've been hunted all my life?
Yeah.
What do you mean there's a predator that is working against me in my whole story?
Yeah.
And that there's a world system, which is a hot word right now in systematic, systemic spaces in the physical realm. But in the spiritual realm, it's because there's a systemic problem and we're not addressing it. And it has to be addressed in order, I think, for a man to walk with God in a way that he actually can discern between the voices of the false self and we'll say the enemy. Talk about Lucifer in just a minute, but and even that noise that just comes from the world, which is, again, Jesus said which we'll talk about in a minute, the prince of this dark world. So in this world, you're going to have troubles, but take courage. I've overcome the world. And yet it's not over yet.
Right.
So what Jesus came to do was defeat the power of sin and to provide not just relief, but freedom. So why aren't more men free? We ask that all the time. Why aren't more men free? The other question we ask at all of our conferences, if you've been, you know. If you come, you'll hear, what are the odds that you've interpreted your life accurately?
Yeah.
At the women's weekend,
I
got to do the warfare talk.
It was interesting. They laughed.
With their heads kind of like absurd that I would I would interpret my life accurately. That's very helpful, because if you can admit that, either whoa, or laughing, if you can admit that, you're one step closer to then this important conclusion. Then there's room for inaccuracy. You're saying by your response that there's some level, you're giving some margin of error, of falseness, of inaccuracy that has been interpreted by you, and therefore you're living with it, living under it.
Yeah.
And
what if we misinterpreted, say it a different way? What if we misinterpreted some of the most pivotal moments of our lives?
I was going to go just for emphasis. just for emphasis.
Just imagine if you could reframe those moments.
Get on the other side of the street, and see what happened that you didn't see.
That's right. Reinterpretation. It's like The Kid, the movie The Kid.
Oh, so many stories and
Rusty
films.
And Russ.
Yeah.
Reinterpreting what happened to us is a crucial part of it, because, as we said in the last episode, if you're just focusing on your sinful behavior or how things aren't going right or whatever it is, you're way too far downstream.
Yeah. And there's a progression here that's really appropriate, SJ. I just want to acknowledge that, when we learn to play instruments, you just are kind of sticking with the three basic chords. When you're just trying to get your mouth on the mouthpiece right.
Not make that clarinet squeak.
Yes, you're just trying to. So music has its progression. Athletics for sure. You're just trying to not. To do what coach is telling you to stand the way you're supposed to stand and to move where you're supposed to move when the ball moves, or when the ball's snapped, when the pitch is pitched, all of that. And then was watching, we were just talking about The Pennant, the series. And the commentators and the former players and what they're saying about at professional
what they can
levels
see.
And what they see. It's a different game than the Sandlot game.
Yeah.
And that's true for this as well. It is a different game. That as a man, you should be progressing to a different understanding and a different way about this game. Repeating the 4th and 5th grade in this is not good.
No.
And knowing that the power and the authority Jesus gives us in Matthew 28 is for something. And you see it in the book of Acts. It's to do the things that he did. And amongst those things were taking care of the bad guys, dealing with the demonic, bringing the weightiness of who you now are in the kingdom, because he's cut keys, he's given you power and authority.
Right, teaching the disciples how to do the same thing. Yes.
And then giving them scrimmages and practices because games are coming.
Yeah.
There's a reason why, we talked about this a while back, how in Toccoa, how long were those guys there in Toccoa, the 101st Airborne from Band of Brothers?
Oh, it was almost a year, I think.
I was going to say.
Might have been a year and 3-4 months, yeah.
That's amazing that we're going to take a year to train you before we deploy you. Jesus took 3. before I'm going to deploy you into this landscape.
Yeah.
And hey, by the way, you're going to need to be aware and competent in your life in me is violently opposed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just you screwing up or not being enough or not doing the right thing all the time. There's actually, like back in the garden, there's an enemy. There's an adversary.
Yeah.
There's an opponent. And Jesus has names for them. And we have to see this and have to understand how it works. And we have to then, as you've mentioned many times, I agree 1,000%, bro. We have to go back in our story. Where have I misinterpreted?
Yeah.
The scenes of my life. Where have I listened to the voice of my enemy? Believing is a better word. Believing that it was mine.
Right.
Shame has a voice and a feeling and a presence. Fear has a voice and a feeling and a presence. Guilt. Diminishment.
All of that.
Discouragement. All of those powerful odors, powerful presence to an image bearer who's trying to be, wanting to be good. There's something that's set against you. And I think all the stories that we tell are inviting us to see that in our story. And yet, if we aren't helping men, and we're going to hit this is my easiest swing. Talk about Otani over the wall, bro. This is my easiest swing at biblical reality. Not that the others were hard, but this is my easiest one.
Yeah, it's not hard to convince guys that shame, diminishment, guilt, all of those things have a voice. They've heard them.
Right.
They just think it's them. So what if we could reinterpret that? And I'm not saying there aren't times
and give a guy a chance
that those are my thoughts.
Yeah.
It's not all coming from outside. I do have my own thoughts.
Yeah.
But if you think, as we say it at the weekends, if you think every thought is your own, you are either untrained or unaware of what's going on.
Naive.
Yeah.
And ignorant is not good, and naive is not good. You made me think too of, I think maybe with what you said took me back to baseball when I was a boy. You're just, the idea that it's fair is just absurd. You know that man-child who was on the mound, Caleb, when you were in 6th grade and he's shaving? And he's throwing 80 miles an hour in Little League?
Yeah, and you're just there for the snow cone?
I mean, you're not even sure. You all you heard was the whack of the the catcher's mitt.
Right.
But so it's not fair if you're ill prepared.
Right.
If you're unaware, it's just not fair because the enemy has been steps ahead. And to think that what Jesus did on the cross somehow took the enemy out is just not biblical. Now, to give us the upper hand, that's different. But to not exercise your option with the authority in which Christ has given his sons, his kingdom men, if you're not enforcing that, then it's going unenforced. And again, that's not a good way to move. Not in your family, not in your marriages, not with your stuff, not with your home.
Yeah, I think about the movie Kingdom of Heaven. You know, does it really make a difference in how a man fights if he knows he's a knight or thinks he's a knight?
Yeah, believes he's a knight. Right.
Absolutely,
right.
It does. So I mean, because they just think they're helpless. Before that, they're you know, in the story, they're going to get overwhelmed. They can't fight. They don't know how to fight as well as the oncoming forces. All that, you know, the story. They're convinced that their enemy is more powerful than they are.
And they actually see him on the other side of the wall.
Yeah.
You know?
And so it's pretty easy to believe that, you know.
Yeah.
But we so often, so many men, Christian men, live in a place where they believe the enemy is stronger than they are. And it's just not the case.
If they're even paying attention at all. I hear you, man. I'm not even trying to, I'm just like, if they even have a biblical worldview that includes warfare. So two things. One, before I read this passage from Ephesians and we get into some more things, a couple things. One was, so I'm in seminary. I'm taking systematic theology, which is the system.
Yeah, the books like that.
Yeah, Wayne Grudem. I mean, it's a textbook that's actually it's brilliant. Mm-hmm. So I'm awakening to warfare in a significant way on my journey, and this is 15. This is 20 years ago, and I'm in seminary for a variety of reasons, and getting my master's in counseling. So. And we're taking systematic theology, and I think I'm still accurate about this. Wayne Grudem's Systematic Theology, chapter 22, demons, and I think it's Satan and demons.
I'll go in my office. I have a copy of it.
I have a copy.
Well, yeah. We should look. We should go get them.
So,
maybe for the next episode, we'll go get them.
So seminary.
Yeah.
I've got 50, 60 people in this theater seating with this professor. And I'm so excited to get to chapter 22. And I see it in the syllabus, and there we are. And he says, hey, we got chapter 22, about, and we have fallen a little bit behind in ours. So I'm just going to leave that.
What?
Seriously. You need to make sure you read that. You'll be responsible for being tested on chapter 22, and we're going to turn on into chapter 23.
Wow.
I sat there. I think you can't say this in seminary. You probably can't say this on the Exploring More podcast, but I think
podcasts are free reign.
I'm sitting there going, what bullshit is this?
Yeah.
I've been waiting for this chapter.
No one's ever talked about this.
This is not good.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that when I tell you that, I say it because I think that is part of the reality.
Right. Even
the professionals or those that were training to be professionals he doesn't even cover it.
Yeah.
There's no class in seminary in all the classes. There was no warfare. There was not a class devoted or committed to warfare. Though 20, my estimation is somewhere between 20 and 25% of the New Testament is all about warfare.
Okay, so we're at a one-day men's conference a couple of months ago. What was it? What was the conference? I can't remember.
Charlotte, Dangerous for Good?
No, up in Virginia. Before we started doing the Dangerous for Good men's summits.
It was the kind of the iron sharpens iron.
Iron sharpens iron. That's what it was.
I was a speaker there.
So there's 5 or 6 guys up on the stage, during one of the main sessions.
Caleb's giving like 10 minutes. I'm like, ignore it.
Whatever.
We're going, bro.
we got 5 or 6 guys up on the stage who are the kind of the breakout speakers. You're one of them.
Yeah.
And God arranged for it, or you did, by kind of shuffling around the stage to be the last guy that kind of gives the summation of this is what I'm going to talk about. And you talked about warfare. You talked about it the way we're talking about it here for about, 2 minutes. And the other speakers were great. And it was, about, going to the mission field and this and that, the other thing. I think there was a parenting one and whatever. But we go up, because I was there as your wingman that weekend. We go up to the room and we got to bring more chairs in.
Yeah.
Because the lead pastor from that church, he's in there. And they're all like, we have never heard this before. There had to be 60 guys in the room.
Yeah, we had a third of the audience.
Yeah.
in our room.
And there was it's not that there isn't a hunger or desire to understand. I think there is, but they don't know to understand because nobody's talking about it.
Yeah, and they were, as the ladies were.
Yeah.
At the deepening weekend, they were. Oh my gosh.
Right.
Why has nobody told us this? That's probably the one thing we hear over and over again.
Oh yeah.
At our weekends, or when we're the guests to come and speak and we address this larger story that your story's in. And in the larger story, there's a holy trinity and an unholy trinity.
Yeah.
Satan and his all his minions, and the fallen world, and your false self. So
the flesh.
So the false self, to talk about that for a second, is this creature, is this thing that somehow, even at conversion, there's a dark part of you. You are now redeemed, but there are things in you that seem to come with the false self, the flesh, Paul calls it.
Yeah, because of where we are and the larger story we're in, all that stuff doesn't just miraculously fall off of you.
Right.
You have to exercise your will in the kingdom, and
how it works,
and get free,
and then maintain, patrol, move, urge. This whole idea of being diligent and paying attention and stand firm and be careful and watch out. All of that stuff is what the friends of Jesus write about to the friends of Jesus, because that's what Jesus talked about. And it's not being talked about, and it's killing us. And it's not a biblical masculinity. If your masculinity program theology does not have heavy doses of warfare and the enemy, because right now I wrote two things I want to read. One from Ephesians and then one from Heart of a Warrior. All right. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, contending only with physical opponents, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly supernatural places. This is not Isaiah or Jeremiah. This is Ephesians. That's Ephesians 6. Ephesians 5 says, be careful. Be careful.
I remember there's one translation that's like, watch out.
Watch out. That's the message. The message is like, watch out. Be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, knowing that your enemy, right? And he ends it with, and that the days are evil. And we just don't live like that.
Right.
We don't, there's a,
yet if you ask a guy walking down the street, hey, do you think we're living in a evil time? Do you think this is do you think the world's broken? Do you think the world's better than it was, 60 years ago?
How many times do we hear end times? Do you think it's the end times, end times, end times?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
it sure seems like it, but
the end times is a time when the enemy is literally, restrictions are being withheld, and he is more at work. But it doesn't mean he's not at work now.
Right.
And so this is, I'm going to read some phrases. So this is in the Heart of a Warrior, but you're going to hear all these phrases from the New Testament, and it was fun to go look them up. So here they made Heart of a Warrior when it says, we need to take heed because a fallen world is a dangerous world. Many things are neither in their right place nor their right mind. The lamb ought not lie down with the lion just yet. Right now, the norm consists of facing conflicts and struggles, overcoming challenges, having courage, crucifying the flesh, walking wisely, being alert, armoring up, standing firm, and walking in a manner worthy of what we've been called to. There's a lot going on. The life that we are meant for, the one granted to us by God, is both fragile and glorious. It must be understood, learned, and practiced. And I would add, if I could edit today, and protected. And if you can't get that crap straight in your world, how are you going to help anybody?
Oh, you're going to harm.
Get it straight in their world.
Yeah.
And so what is the enemy up to? That's how I want to, okay, you can do 5 minutes now. Is it 5 minutes? Good. So, how
can I begin to see the larger story and move differently? So for the guy that's listening to this, or the woman, how can I begin to see this and move differently?
Yeah. All right. The silliest thing comes to my mind right now. You need to order Heart of a Warrior.
Yeah. That's not silly.
You just need to order that. You need to order that book.
Yeah.
And read about these things. Because to be a warrior in the kingdom, it's not just slaying, sin. It's about the one who's at work, tempting, luring, and the system that's available to them, I'll say them, to prevent you from experiencing the very freedom that's yours in Christ. So Neil Anderson, huge forerunner in this, in The Bondage Breaker and
Victory Over the
Darkness, huge forerunning books in the 90s, I think, early 90s. But I would say that, you definitely, so most people, what's great about it, if there's one thing that's great about it, is they actually have been experiencing enough of the enemy. And whether it's through fear, panic attacks, being overrun with guilt or shame, I mean, we are victims and casualties of this. Secondly, the other thing that I think is important is Romans 7, where we do the things we don't want to do, and we don't do the things we want to do. So our experience is showing us and telling us something's not right.
Yeah.
And this is Morpheus and Neo and red pill, blue pill.
Yep.
You know something's not right.
Splinter
something's
in your mind.
wrong with the world. And the matrix is the thing that's been pulled over your eyes.
Yeah. And do you want to be awakened, or do you want to go back to sleep? Yeah.
And so I would say the theology of this is available in Heart of Warrior and King Me, and the enemy wants to use people in this system of warfare. The enemy wants to use people. Wounded, you've heard this, wounded people wound people. And so this warfare that's taking place is over you. It's over who's going to be in charge of you.
If there's a war over territory, which most of them usually are, it's the territory of your heart.
Who's going to be in charge of you?
Right.
You in a partnership with God, or you in bondage to darkness?
Because the enemy knows there's treasure there, right? That's in the physical realm. That's why one country invades another. I want their oil. I want their diamonds. I want their resources.
Their influence.
I want their whatever it is.
Yeah, it's a great parallel.
I mean, that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
The enemy knows the treasure that's there. And if you wake up to it, if you watch the Matrix movies again, because they're, that's 1999. That's
I know.
25 years now.
Narnia.
But if you watch it,
Lord of the
Narnia,
Rings.
all of that, if you watch them, the enemy not only does Morpheus and the rest of the crew that's awake want to wake Neo up, the agents and the Matrix want to put him back to sleep.
They want to take him out.
Yeah,
right.
But I mean, they want to keep you asleep.
Yeah.
And actually, they get one of them. Cypher is one of the guys.
He goes back.
He goes back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's what they want to convince you that it's better that way.
Yeah. So the kingdom masculinity we're talking about has to see and understand how it works and embrace the idea that your life in the kingdom is opposed, and that much of what your work needs to be done in the training, healing and training of you to become a oriented man is to recover what's been stolen. The enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy.
Yeah.
Well, I would say to anybody listening, what does he have in your file? Just to give it some kind of figurative, like, what do they have on you?
Yeah. Because if you don't deal with that, you're going onto the battlefield wounded already.
And I'm not saying that this stuff in the file is your fault.
Right. No.
Because so much of the things that we tend to fall victim to and that we then perpetuate and do, they have roots in the file. They have ways that were created in our hearts and minds.
Yeah.
And believe how many of you have interpreted your life accurately. So when you have lies operating in your system about God, about you, about others, about tons of things, that you might have made some mistakes, but does that mean you're a mistake? Do you believe you're a mistake?
Right.
I mean, the enemy wants to take it to the extreme.
And he will.
And be so subtle at it that you don't even know they're there.
Mm-hmm. Until you start to push back, and then they start to ramp up, and you're like, wait a second.
Yeah, well, they don't have to play 5th grade, 6th grade ball anymore.
That's right.
You just left. You just became
Now you're
something
playing
more.
Yeah, you're playing in the NBA now, and so they're going to up their game.
They've got to do something different.
So interesting. I'm going to mention this resource because it's very, very important in the context of masculinity, kingdom masculinity, and the files that they hold against us. Mm-hmm. Pornography is rampant. It's like a wildfire burning through the masculine and the feminine hearts around us. And Jay Stringer's book Unwanted, it is. I would suggest that you pick that book up as quickly as you can, because he ties all of these things back to pornography. Is not just a sin you engage in, a bad thing you're doing, and you just quit doing that and put a bunch of stuff on your phone so you can't. Not that that's a bad idea. But you've got to get to the root of what's in the file that is making you turn to that.
Yeah. For life.
For
a
life.
For a faux.
For numbing. Life. To try to deal with the things that are in your background.
So I'm reading that book some months ago, and I get to about, I think it's chapter 3 if I remember. But I'm just telling you, Caleb, if I'm reading a Christian book and it doesn't talk about Satan and warfare and the enemy somewhere in those first 3 or 4 chapters. So when he does, I'm like, yes, I can keep reading. I can keep reading. I can keep reading.
I'm with you.
Whether it's a seminar or whether it's a book, if it does not talk about this, I won't continue reading it.
Yeah.
Because the context is not there.
Yeah.
And 2, I'm sure not going to recommend it.
Right.
Because it's just perpetuating this idea that the only 2 main characters in your story are you and God. And you just need to try harder, man.
Yeah, because the problem certainly can't be
You need to get
with
more
God.
Serious, man.
Yeah.
You need to be more committed, man.
Buckle down.
Buckle up, buckle down.
Yeah.
And so I think this is why there is a problem. If you don't understand what they have on you, how they're working it, your false self is that internal work is to diminish that thing that's actually made up of the wounding and traumatic times in which you did misinterpret your life. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, let me tell you, if your dad beat you, I'm not saying you probably didn't misinterpret the message he was giving, or your mom ignored you.
Right, the trauma you experienced.
So let me be clear that not all of it's misinterpretation.
But the agreement and the value made based on that.
About you.
About yourself.
Yeah.
That's open to reinterpretation.
And that's what fathers are like, or that's what mothers are like.
Or that's what sons who don't know.
That's what happens to you.
Have something wrong with them is
all
like,
all of those things
so
are
I would say
in the file. And it's a warfare file. This is not supposed to be espionage.
It's a map up on the wall. Mm-hmm. You see in Band of Brothers, they had the giant map about the invasion of D-Day. It's like that, except it's specifically made for you. And the map, the territory, as we said earlier, is your heart. Yeah. And they have those things on you. I would say pick up Heart of a Warrior if you haven't, read about identity, warfare, image bearing. And then get into Jay Stringer's book, or do it the other way around. It doesn't really matter, but it's a really, really helpful resource. Okay, question of the week from Mark McDonald, J3N. And this is so interesting. Why is it so important for Christian speakers to use the word warrior? Who should Christians be at war with? Thank you for asking that question, Mark. That's why we just did this episode. Yeah, man.
Yeah. Well, the conflict's internal.
And I think, too, the war, to be for a lot of men, no matter their background, no matter how they walk it out, thinking of themselves as a warrior, one who can engage in this story is an important image to hold of yourself, because Jesus was a warrior.
Yeah, we're not talking about I don't even start over, but I want to say, for us, a warrior is a man who has a cause and a king.
Right.
Who has a cause and a king. That's what we have taught and shared many times. And so that's loaded when I say that. I think the first conflict that you need intentionality and discernment and the ability to take back what has been taken from you in an aggressive way is the battle within, between the false self and true self. And again, if you don't know what that means, get Heart of a Warrior, get King Me, because the warrior that we're talking about, right, especially in the masculine journey that we know, the lever comes first in terms of the ability to experience love, to be loved by God, and then to fight for God, with and you're not fighting. I just read it. You're not fighting against flesh and blood. You're fighting against the spiritual forces of this darkness.
Yeah.
And so that's why warriors are needed.
And we refer to warriors because we're in a war. And we need men who can fight.
Well-trained, well-equipped, well-informed.
Yeah.
So that when evil does raise its head, and if you can't overcome that in your story, you're not going to be helpful to somebody in theirs. So that's why the first real conflict is the internal one, where you start to walk with God, partner with Jesus, and go after these things that apparently the power and the authority that he commissions us with is going to be for something. You're going to need it.
What's the point?
What's the point? You're going to need to enforce this. And if you don't know where the enemy has been in your life, I was going to say, give us a call, but I think that there is evidence. There's evidence in your life, and it's not just failure, but there's evidence in your life of the things that you don't want to do, that you do, and the things that you wish you did but somehow can't.
Yeah,
that's a great place to go, and to be vigilant, to learn in the trial and error of even learning how to break the vows and the agreements that you've made that actually enables the false self to run the show. It takes courage, it takes strength, and it takes, you said, an act of your will. That's what we mean by warrior. If I keep going, we'll get into another session. But that is such a great question.
It is a great question.
And come to a conference, man.
Yeah.
Come to a DFG. That's what we do there.
That's right.
We are equipping men all over the country, 200 at a time, with this theology.
Yeah.
And this encouragement, so that they can have a chance to overthrow the crap that the enemy has on them. And healing is part of it.
Yep.
Literally, healing is part of it. Training, yes, but recovery, healing from the damage that was done, so that we can fight the good fight.
That's right.
Like Paul said, that we
right.
can fight the good fight.
All right, we got to land this plane or we're going to run out of fuel. So it's good, man.
Yeah, super good. So, hey, thanks for joining us today on the Exploring More podcast. You're so important and so significant to this story, to God, that there's a villain in this story, just like all the other stories that seem to matter. There's a villain in this story that is after you and wants to keep you, prevent you from experiencing what you were made for. If you missed that, listen to the session before on image bearing, because you were made for intimacy and oneness and connectedness with God. And there is a war a violent war going on to prevent that. And you have a part to play. That's what I want to say to every man and the women who have to deal with men, that, hey, you have a part to play, bro. And if you don't see or understand how this works, you're probably captive. So it's important. Kingdom masculinity. Let's keep going. We'll see you next time on the Exploring More podcast.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoe.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoe on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoe on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.